They ask, where have all the good men gone? They look around and see broken relationships, unanswered messages, men disappearing without reason. They ask each other over dinner, at the gym, on social media, why the world seems to no longer have kind, sincere, and serious men. But maybe the answer isn't that good men have disappeared. Maybe it's that they've stopped. They've stopped chasing, stopped trying to be understood, stopped making the effort to be chosen. They don't show up like they used to. They're not as proactive as before. They no longer crave a relationship if the price is to lose themselves, because there have been too many times they gave and were seen as ordinary. Too many times they opened up and were seen as weak. Too many times they chose truth and were called dry. They haven't vanished. They've simply chosen silence. And in that silence, they're watching, they're asking themselves, the woman who says she wants a good man, would the good man even want the person she's becoming? This isn't a video to blame, not to attack, but to open an honest, clear, and necessary conversation. Because sometimes, what makes a good man step back isn't that he stopped loving, it's that he no longer feels needed. If you're ready to hear something that's not easy to hear, then this video is for you. You once thought that good men had disappeared, that the world now only had shallow people, not serious, unwilling to commit, unable to love, genuinely. But the truth is, they never disappeared. They just withdrew, quietly, silently, no noisy, no announcement. They didn't give up because they stopped loving. They gave up because they were no longer chosen as something valuable. You may not notice it, but 63% of men under 30 are currently single. Among them, 61% still say they want a serious, long-term relationship. They're not afraid of love, not afraid of commitment. They're afraid of being rejected for who they truly are. They're afraid that no matter how hard they try, in someone's eyes, they'll always be not enough. And say, not tall enough, not rich enough, not interesting enough, not impressive enough. They enter conversations with sincerity, but what they receive is silence, a cold shake of the head, a rejection without even a reason. You don't see them because they've stopped showing up. They're no longer the ones who text first, no longer the ones suggesting to meet, no longer the ones trying to keep a conversation going nowhere. They've learned that when you're always the one starting, you'll eventually be the first to be left behind. They start choosing silence over effort. They start choosing to withdraw instead of constantly moving forward, only to crash into indifference. Not because they're cold, but because they were once too warm. Not because they don't need love, but because they once loved with everything they had and received too little to stay whole. And slowly, they realized they weren't chosen. They were just used. They were the listener when someone was hurting, but not the one loved when things were peaceful. They were the support when someone fell, but not the first person thought of when someone wanted to build a future. You see, good men haven't disappeared. You just don't see them anymore because they've chosen not to speak. They've chosen to step back, not to retreat completely, but to protect what's left of their self-respect, of the peace in their hearts. And if one day you meet them again, the man who once gave too much, who stayed silent too long, then maybe the only thing left for you to recognize will be his eyes. Eyes that no longer hope. Only clarity remains. He's still a good man, but now he saves that goodness for himself. You were taught that, as a man, you need to be strong, to lead, to take action. But then one day, you start to realize everything that used to be your instinct is now seen as a threat. Your initiative is called control. Your protection is seen as force. Your silence is labeled as lack of emotion. And if you show anger, even once you're immediately branded as toxic, you start to fear yourself. Fear speaking up. Fear expressing. Fear being misunderstood. Fear that a light touch, an honest compliment, a simple coffee invite, will be turned into evidence against you. You begin to shrink, Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't know where the safe boundaries are to be yourself. The world tells you to be soft, to be sensitive, to share more. But the moment you show pain, you're seen as weak. When you speak truth, you're called dry. When you're silent, you're scolded for not caring. When you're decisive, you're called controlling. And when you yield, you're judged as lacking backbone. You no longer know where you belong in this story, because every role comes with risk. You're not allowed to be wrong, not allowed to be tired, not allowed to fall back, and absolutely not allowed to break. You live in a world where any masculine behavior, whether instinct or support, must be filtered. Worse, you're forced to change, while no one really understands what you're losing. No one asks, how did it feel to be seen as the problem, when all you wanted was to be trusted? No one asks, what happens to a generation of men forced to suppress the very things that make them who they are? Just to avoid attack, you step back not because you're weak, but because you realize you're not allowed to exist honestly. And in that world, where you must ask permission to express your nature, being a man, sometimes, is no longer safe. Not because you intend to harm, but because you've become the symbol of everything society wants to blame. And when your existence is labeled as wrong, the only thing you have left is silence. But make no mistake, that silence is not surrender. It is a reminder to the world. A man cannot be a foundation if he has no place to stand. And when you're no longer allowed to be yourself, you start choosing to disappear from a game that's already been rigged. You've heard this story 1,000 times, about women rising to fight for the right to learn, to work, to choose. And you can't deny, the first wave of feminism made history. Women earned the vote, walked into universities, divorced abusive husbands without being cast out. They fought not against men, but for a voice in their own lives. That wasn't a revolution of hate, but of justice and dignity. And if you lived in that time, you would stand with them. But then something changed. When the second wave rose, the conversation shifted. From demanding rights to casting aside core parts of identity, they no longer said a woman can stay home if she wants. They said, if you choose that, you're disgracing yourself. Motherhood was called blind sacrifice. Being a wife meant submission. The kitchen became a prison, and the man by your side, a symbol of oppression. They didn't encourage choice. They declared that unless you abandon family for career, you're wasting your life. So millions of women left their beloved homes, entered a world that was competitive, harsh, and lonely, not because they wanted to, but because they were told that was success. You've seen those women, smart, independent, walking through airports alone, signing contracts, big and bold, choosing where they live, who they love, how they live. But at night, after the applause fades and the modern apartment grows cold, they ask themselves, am I truly free? Or am I just trying to prove something I'm not even sure of? Then came the third wave of feminism, a wave not just about rights, but redefining them. Women don't have to mother. They don't need their gender. They don't need men. They can become anyone, even men. Boundaries erased. Responsibility seen as restraint. Femininity defined as a costume to put on and take off. You were taught that emotion is weakness. Love is losing yourself. Caring is demeaning your value. And so you hardened, became independent, confident, but also drifting. Because no one told you that separation never builds connection. That strength isn't about needing no one, but knowing when softness is needed. That success means little if there's no one to share it with. You chased a version of freedom designed by others, and when you reached for it, you realized it's colder than you thought. And now, when you return, the men who once waited at the threshold are gone. They don't resent you. They don't criticize. They just aren't there anymore. Because on your journey to self-liberation, you were taught to leave them behind, but never shown how to hold them still. So ask yourself one final question before continuing alone. Are you truly free? or just a pawn in a system that made you believe loneliness equals strength. You grew up in a world where the image of a father stood for leadership, a pillar, a silent guardian who always stood firm. You were taught that family is a foundation, that love isn't a fleeting spark, but consistent repetition through the years. You were taught that to be a man means responsibility, sacrifice, protection, and once upon a time, these things were respected. But then everything changed. Family ceased to be a place to return to and became a place to escape from. You saw children grow up without fathers, not because the father had passed away, but because people decided he was no longer needed. The man was removed from the family portrait gently as if he was redundant, without value. And when his presence was no longer a support, everything began to crack from within. You live in an era where traditional morality is deemed outdated. Religion once formed the basis for teaching compassion, gratitude, self-control. Now, those values are mocked as antiquated. People live by emotion, chase pleasure, prioritize individual rights. Nothing holds them accountable. No one must keep promises. No one feels shame for betrayal. And you begin to realize, when morality disappears, love cannot endure. You were once taught to bear burdens, to take charge, to make difficult decisions. But now, if you voice an opinion, you're labeled patriarchal. If you wish to protect, you're accused of controlling. If you lead, you're seen as imposing. Every act once honored as responsibility has become a crime. And so you stop. You step back. Not because you stopped loving, but because you're no longer allowed to express love in your own way. You see society unraveling. You see impulsive relationships easy to enter, easy to leave. You hear people speak of freedom rather than commitment. You see children lost within their own homes, and you understand that it all starts somewhere. The family foundation has been removed. Without a model, without a shared voice, without anyone respected for daring to sacrifice for another, then love has nowhere to anchor. You begin to understand that it's not that society lacks men. It lacks men who still believe their roles matter. And while men are labeled controlling, as problems to be fixed, the only thing they want is to keep the roof from collapsing. But now, that house has lost its foundation. And without a foundation, neither love nor hope can stand. Not because the man didn't try, but because no one afforded him the right to try. You used to be the one who took the initiative, the one who texted first, the one who preserved relationships fraying at the edges, the one who endured when the other remained silent. You believed that if you were persistent enough, sincere enough, kind enough, someone would eventually notice. You used to argue to be understood, explain to be empathized with, torture yourself, because someone turned their back without saying why. But at a certain point, you realized not everyone listens, and not everyone deserves your effort. So you changed, no longer rushing to fix everything, no longer reacting to every vague emotion coming from someone else, no longer seeking acceptance where none is offered. You began to step back, not because you didn't care, but because you wanted to see who remained when you stopped holding on. You became silent, not because you felt nothing, but because you chose to reserve your feelings for what truly matters. No more arguing, no more competing, no more winning or losing, just peace. You once thought that love meant effort. That love needed proof. That love demanded constant demonstration. But now you understand. True love doesn't need begging for recognition. It doesn't require you to lose yourself to be kept. And if a relationship forces you to pretend, to hold up a facade, to always seem fine while you're breaking inside, then it's no longer for you. You changed not because you lost faith in love, but because you've lived enough to know that true love doesn't exhaust you. It doesn't force you to sacrifice your best self to stay. It doesn't make you trade your dignity just to have someone beside you. And if love demands that you shrink, endure, or wear a mask, you choose to walk away rather than bow. You no longer over-explain, no longer try to make others understand you. You let your consistency speak instead. You no longer need someone to prove your worth. You know who you are. You know what you bring. And you know what you deserve. No more compromise. No more pleading. No more asking permission to be yourself. You didn't retreat because you were weak. You retreated because you awakened. Because you understand that your silence is an answer. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to stop. Not to retaliate. Not to punish. But to preserve what remains whole of you after giving too much. Now, you're not chasing anyone. You're no longer seeking validation. You're just building, rebuilding yourself, building a career, health, peace, building a life where you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. And if someone enters your life, they don't come to make you feel complete. They come because you are already complete. You don't need love to make you whole. You only need someone deep enough not to draw away the wholeness you already hold. This is you now. A man who once hurt, who once broke, who once sacrificed the kindest parts of himself for love. But today, you are no longer searching. You are no longer calling, no longer clutching. You don't chase. You observe, and if no one truly sees you, you no longer need to reveal yourself. Because an awakened man doesn't need an audience to understand him. He only needs himself, and that's enough. You once walked into a room with nothing but sincerity. No embellishments. No theatrics. No trying to be a more attractive version of yourself. You simply were who you were, steady. Responsible. Unshowy. But then you realize something very clear. In this world, stability is no longer what people desire. They want emotional highs. They crave drama. They want something that quickens the heart, even if it shatters right after. You're not good at playing games. You don't know how to send sweet texts and disappear. You don't know how to play push and pull to spark curiosity. You don't pretend to be busy to create space. You don't speak grandly just to impress. You only know how to listen, respond on time, show up when needed. And you think these things should be enough for someone to see you as genuinely wanting to build. But no, you're labeled predictable, lacking mystery, nothing special, free. You're not too handsome, not too rebellious. You don't feel dangerous, and so you're ignored, placed in the nice guy zone, reserved for moments when they're tired of men who aren't real. You don't create dramatic tension. You don't give them headaches guessing your next move. But you also don't make their hearts race. And in a world where love is equated with a thrill, you become invisible. You once asked yourself, what's wrong with being real, with consistent kindness, with someone who doesn't walk away when you're weak, doesn't go silent when you need to share, doesn't make you doubt when you lose connection? You begin to understand women aren't rejecting good men. Their eyes just don't see them anymore. Because safety, in their view, is misunderstood as boredom. You're rejected. Not because you're bad, but because you don't know how to be addictive. You don't make their hearts skip beats with unpredictable actions. You don't drive them to emotional tension. You don't stimulate that need to conquer. Because you show up with clarity, no hidden meaning, no challenge, only genuine presence. And sadly, that's not enough to stand out in a society accustomed to love as a game. You understand that good men aren't always chosen first. They often come after wounds, after messy affairs, after the other is exhausted, chasing what they thought was attractive. Only when they hit their limit do they see the man who once stood there, who was kind, who waited quietly, was the one most worth keeping. But sometimes, when they come around, you're no longer there, because you can't wait forever for someone to learn to value the simplest thing, a man who doesn't try to make you infatuated, but only wants to make you peaceful. And if that peace is mistaken for lack of emotion, then perhaps what people call love never truly began. This isn't a battle between men and women. It's a battle between people and the lies they were forced to believe, that men are oppressors, that women are victims, that love is control, that family is a prison, that genuine connection is weakness. We're not fighting each other. We're fighting an ideology that has led both sides astray. You've seen it. When one half feels disrespected, the other half feels unnecessary. When men choose silence over argument, and women choose independence instead of building together. When everyone holds on to their point of view, but no one has the courage to hold on to each other. We're losing what's fundamental: trust, compassion, the ability to listen, and the courage to stay. Family vanishes. Society drifts. Everyone protects themselves, forgetting that humans weren't made to live in isolation. Revival won't come from someone winning. It comes when someone lowers their voice first. When someone steps forward toward the other. When someone is clear enough to understand that no one is strong forever, and no one remains weak forever. Everyone has made mistakes. Everyone has been hurt. But if all we do is blame, criticise, or take sides, in the end, there is nothing left to hold on to. You need a new choice. Not choosing sides, but choosing perspective. Choose connection, rather than power. Choose understanding, rather than attack. Choose love not because someone is perfect, but because they were brave enough to be real with you. And if you once thought staying silent was the way to avoid getting hurt, maybe you need to believe this too. No one can be themselves if they're always having to guard against the one they want to love. Love doesn't require perfect people. It needs people mature enough to realize that if both stay silent, nothing gets heard. If both retreat, who remains? If both try just to win, then both lose. And the first loss is the chance to write a new chapter together. A chapter where men no longer fear being seen as wrong, where women no longer force themselves to prove anything, where two people don't see each other as opponents, but as the last companion in a world gradually forgetting how to love. He's still there, still going to work every day, still living with integrity, still keeping his promises, even when no one expects him to anymore. He didn't disappear like you thought. He simply withdrew from the places where his sincerity was once taken for granted. He no longer knocks on your heart, no longer tries to get your attention, no longer asks how you're doing, no longer tries to start conversations, no longer hopes for something uncertain. Now, he watches from a distance, watching you choose the ones who make your heart race, watching you chase intense emotions, watching you get hurt, and then start over with someone just like before. And though he never says it, he's still there as a witness, not a participant. No more blame, no more expectations, just a long silence, both sad and relieving. He once wanted to be part of your life, once thought he could be the one who stayed, once believed that if he was sincere enough, he would be seen. But when his heart wasn't treated with the same kindness it gave, he no longer had a reason to keep trying. And if you come back, maybe he's still there, but in a place you can't reach anymore, not because of distance, but because the timing no longer belongs to the both of you. If you were ever the good man misunderstood, or if you ever lost a man like that, just say one line: I see clearly now. Because sometimes, realizing too late is exactly why you can't begin again.